there's lots of good news really, not just that we've got rid of the Tory government in, and that is something, whatever we think about Keir Starmer, and we'll come on to that in a minute, is actually a good thing. But also some particularly horrendous examples of stories of being defeated, and loads of them didn't even stand because they knew they were going to lose, which was nice, Michael Gove and people. But people like Johnny Mercer, who was the veterans minister, real militarist character, he's gone. Liz Truss, who lost a huge majority of Norfolk, which is a pretty big achievement by any standard. And we also had Rees-Mogg, we had, and also it's worth saying Liam Fox, that's two in Somerset who went Labour from Tories. But it's also worth saying that Jonathan Ashworth, who's one of the more unpleasant Starmerites, also lost his seat in Leicester South to Shaka Adam, who's the brother of Ishmael Patel, who speaks quite often on our demonstrations, and who got a very clear victory, as did a number of other independents in Batley, in Perry Barr in Birmingham, and many other people, as Trina said, came very, very close to it. And I suppose the high point for most of it, the reason I stayed up till 4 o'clock, was of course Jeremy Corbyn winning, and that was a tremendous achievement as well. And Labour put a lot into ensuring he didn't get elected. They had some of the cream of right-wing Labour turned up. Tom Watson was there, the former deputy leader yesterday. You had Peter Mandelson, you had Margaret Hodge. You had all the worst elements of the people who really tried to destroy Corbyn came along and tried to win it for Labour. And of course, the Labour guy was a councillor from Islington South, who actually is a millionaire who has made a huge amount of money out of private medicine. He does IVF private medicine. So this is the kind of calibre of people they think should be fit to be candidates. And certainly, my experience going around, because our office, Scotland Law office, is just around the corner from where their headquarters was absolutely remarkable every time I've been out, because the more that firstly, huge numbers of people came out to canvass and to support Jeremy, but also it was very notable that on the council estates he had huge support, which is people who've been involved in the elections will know is often quite a difficult place to get people to come out. Quite often people say, what's the point and everything. He had a huge amount of support there from people across a whole number of ethnic minorities. And the richer the houses, and there are, as people will know, a number of very rich and desirable by estate agent standards houses, the more you got to the posh areas, the more you saw the Labour posters. So, Tufnell Park, where Neil Kinnock lives, that's where you had, loads and loads of Labour posters and all that kind of thing. And it's an interesting thing to be aware, because in a way, in London in particular, this isn't true for all of the country, but in places like where I live in Hackney, and in lots of inner London particularly, sort of middle class and working class people both tend to vote Labour, so you don't get a sort of distinction there. But when you do get a clear left alternative, it was obvious that people felt that was important. Indeed, we met this kid who was playing with a football in the morning outside one of the blocks. And so I started talking to him, and he was saying, oh, what's Jeremy Corbyn standing? I don't know what my mum said to him. Then this woman came out of the block, and she said, oh, no, I'm voting Labour. And this kid just said, you don't want to do that. They put your rent up, they put your tax up, they put everything up. You don't want to vote for them, you've got to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. So she goes, all right. A great canvas. So you had all that sort of going on, and that was very, very noticeable. I'm sure it's true as well. I know from talking to Michael in Preston and in a lot of other areas that actually there is a very big class divide here, and that Labour's kind of managerialism, of course, still does get a lot of working class votes, but increasingly people are sort of alienated from it in all sorts of ways. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is the independents, by and large, the left-wing independents do very, very well. Not all of them, but enough of them to get the MPs in the places that I've mentioned, which Labour wasn't expecting at all, the pollsters weren't expecting at all, and that was a big achievement. But also where they didn't. I mean, Michael got 20% of the vote and came second in Preston. Andrew Feinstein in Hogan standing against Starmer got nearly 20% and came second. You know, they're very, very good votes, and they're not easy votes to particularly get in these situations. And Leanne Mohammed, which is a real shame, came within 500 votes of getting rid of West Streeting, which would have been a big story. And a real shame, both because she as an individual is a very good, principled young woman, Palestinian woman, but also because to get rid of Streeting and all these plans for privatising the NHS would be an achievement. So it's a real shame. And of course, all of them are now saying, oh, these were intimidatory campaigns. Now, you've seen Leanne Mohammed, she's spoken a number of times, and she's shorter than me, I think. I can't really judge very well. She's very small, Jonathan Woodley said, but maybe she's not. But she's a small Muslim woman who is incredibly reasonable, is incredibly, open to discussing. The idea that she's threatening West Streeting is so ludicrous, really. But they're doing this with all of them. They can't admit this is a political defeat for them, so they have to put all these stories in. So that brings us on to Labour government, and like the older people in the room here, we haven't had that many Labour governments in our lifetime. So the younger people, you probably hardly remember having a Labour government. So good, Labour government is always preferable to Tory government, and to get rid of the really open, hateful ruling class worries is always a good thing. So one cheer for that. But then you look at the Labour government, and it's important here not just to look at the policies, which we can perhaps discuss a bit, but we have discussed quite a lot. Labour got 2/3 of the seats in this election on 1/3 of the votes. Its votes were actually lower than Corbyn got. The number of votes they got were lower than what Corbyn got in 2019, which was the worst disaster since forever, and let alone in 2017. So this is not a government which really has a huge amount of legitimacy, and it's a symbol of the completely odd electoral system in the country that it is able to get so many landslide votes. And of course, the other thing is worth saying, if you hadn't had reform, if there hadn't been that split in the Tory vote, the Tories may well have won this election, because it's absolutely clear there was virtually, the reasons that people gave for why they voted Labour, vast majority was to get rid of the Tories. When you look at, because we like the leader, it's 1% or something like that, you've got a huge discrepancy there, and that's a real problem for Starmer. It's already been covered up. You can read the today, you can read the Financial Times, you can read all these, and they'll all tell you that, it wasn't just luck, it was a clever strategy on the part of Keir Starmer, which does beg the question why he couldn't actually get any more votes, really, than previous failed Labour parties have done. And actually John Curtis this morning was on the television and actually said the only reason that Labour has really improved its vote was because of Scotland and the collapse of the SNP, and Labour obviously regaining its kind of traditional territory in Glasgow and central Scotland and so on. So this is not an endorsement for Keir Starmer or for Labour's policies. That's absolutely clear. It's absolutely not. And it's got far more to do with Tory collapse than with enthusiasm for Labour. And again, this is a problem, because if you have a government which is now going in to office with, the country is absolutely broken sort of infrastructure-wise, everybody knows that, whether it's trains or sewage, or schools or hospitals, whatever it is, everybody knows. There are huge things that need to be done in order to change the situation here. Neither party talked at all about doing this. In fact, nearly all the discussion was, if somebody like Green said, oh, we need to spend more money on such and such, they were immediately, the only question is how will you pay for it, not whether it's the right thing to do. A question, of course, which is never asked about, nuclear submarines or arms or any of the other sorts of things. So, you've got this situation where there is really huge problems, a government which is fragmented to its left and right, really. The Greens did well, got 4 seats, and they actually got as many seats as the Reform Party. The Independents got more than the Greens or the Reform Party. You had Jeremy and the other Palestine Independents. So it's fragmented to the left, but of course it's also fragmented to the right. And Reform, although it only got 4 seats, obviously was in a number of places. If you look, particularly in what they call the Red Wall seats, particularly in the northeast of England, you know, in Sunderland, Durham, you know, lots of these places, they are in second place and they could easily win in a future election. And by the way, I don't necessarily buy that they're all saying Starmer's got 10 years. I mean, the situation is so unstable, politically, both domestically and internationally. Who knows how long? You know, I mean, Boris Johnson had a majority of 80 and it didn't help him. No, right, they've got a bigger majority than that. But the situation may be that you'll have an election in 2, 3, 4 years' time. And in that situation, you've got Reform is a real danger. And of course, part of the problem is that we're seeing this internationally, this polarisation to left and right. We're seeing it very concretely in France at the moment with the election, the second round of the elections this Sunday, which it looks like the far right RM isn't going to do as well as they hoped, and the new Popular Front actually is doing quite well. So let's hope that that's kind of the situation that you get. But so you've got this polarisation, but also one of the reasons that the right-wing parties are so able to take advantage of it is because it completely fits with the narrative that people are being fed all the time. That if there's a problem with your housing or your kids can't get a house, that's because immigrants are taking them. There's all these people coming over in boats. There's people who are disabled who could go and work, or whatever the sort of right-wing agenda that you get from the Mail and the Express and the Sun. Of course, the Sun has now endorsed Starmer, so we can look forward to what that's going to mean. Then it really fits with that agenda, and of course it does become a protest vote for a whole number of people who might otherwise look in different directions, but so far haven't, or maybe you could say the left hasn't so far put forward a strong enough alternative for them to do so. And with Starmer, I think this is going to increase. We know he's going to disappoint. We know that there's going to be all sorts of things. I mean, we know he wouldn't give way over the 2-child benefit cap, which means what you're doing is consigning millions of children to poverty. That's what you're doing. We know how awful he is over things like Gaza, and I don't see them really changing on this. I don't think they can really break with the US on these kind of policies. So I think they'll stay the same. So he will disappoint both on domestic and international issues. The NHS. Everyone you talk to about the NHS and everyone's own experience is you can't get appointments, you're on a waiting list for years, and all the NHS is already broken and badly broken, and so he will disappoint. So I suppose the question here is that you've got this polarisation going on, and you've got a race against time. Really, you've got the danger of the right growing, and with 4 MPs in Parliament, I mean, 3 of them are from East Coast seaside towns, so perhaps coastal erosion might have some effect on getting rid of them. But you can't bank on that. And Farage is a clever operator. I mean, one reason he did well in this election, he gets loads and loads of publicity, but one reason is because he sounds more plausible, and he sounds more kind of, he's got more to say, and he's not frightened of controversy in a way that the 2 main parties very, very much are, So I think we have to be aware of that. And it does mean we've got to build the left. We've got to build the left both as a Marxist left, the sort that Campari is, but we've also got to think about how we can begin to address some of these really fundamental questions. Because, when you look at so much of, and particularly, perhaps being in big cities hides some of it, but in some of the small towns and smaller cities, and this is again very similar to France. In the big cities, you've got the left vote is very, very strong. Once you get to the smaller places, then that's when the fascists and the far right have got much, much more strength. So we have to find a way of actually getting through. The left is isolated from working class people by and large. And that's what we've got to try and crack. And you have to do that in all sorts of ways. We've partly done it through the Gaza question. Although that is always, I noticed the Guardian referred to pro-Palestine areas the other day in an article. I presume they mean areas with lots of Muslims in them. But of course we know this is also an issue. It is a big issue for Muslim people who are overwhelmingly workers in this country. But it's also an issue for other people. But we need to be able to do this around the NHS, we need to be able to do it around all the different issues, and the left needs to be able to get rooted in some of these areas that we don't have. So that, it seems to me, is also a challenge electorally. But then, of course, we do have to recognise that elections, and we've seen this with this one, they're a reflection of what's happening in society, but they aren't actually the things which lead to the fundamental change in society. Starmer's already told us that we're going to happen after all, so we can be certain about that. So we need to think about the trade union movement, strengthening the unions, getting the unions much more deeply involved in campaigns that are going on, and that isn't happening by and large. The unions haven't increased their membership as a result of the strikes of the last couple of years. They're still kind of quite low, they're still quite outside of a lot of working class areas. I think you have to assume that quite a lot of members of unions will have voted for reform, or, it's just a fact that this is likely to be the case. So how do we talk about strengthening unions? It seems to me this is one of the most important things that we've got to do. Final point I'd like to make is this period of great instability. I think the likelihood of the war in Ukraine getting worse and worse is very high, because the failure of the imperial powers in Gaza is leading them to more arms from Ukraine. They're absolutely terrified about a Trump victory, which they think might mean support for Russia. But on the other hand, at the moment they're defending Biden, who clearly is not fit for office and shouldn't be able to be, which will hand the election to Trump. I know, of course, if you look at the polls since that debate, that's virtually certain. So that's going to be a very, very unstable thing. So the question of what happens outside is massively important. We don't know what that is going to be, both domestically and internationally, but these are some of the things we've got to think about. And these things, we can't decree that there'll be big demonstrations or strikes or whatever it is. You can't decree that these things happen. But it is the case that we need to think about what we want to do and how we begin to bring the left together in order to achieve that, and in order to present an alternative pole, not just to the Reform, not just to the Tories, but to Labour and what Labour is doing as well. And that is a very big task, but I think it's one that this election shows us very, very starkly, firstly, that it is possible, but secondly, that it is very, very urgently needed as well.